Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this presentation this morning. It is my real pleasure to introduce Dr. John Bristow. John completed his undergraduate studies in geology and an MSc in geology at the University of Natal, then a PhD in geochemistry at the University of Cape Town. His thesis was on the geology and origin of the Karoo volcanics, preserved in the Lubombo monocline, which stretches down the eastern margin of South Africa. Thereafter, he spent 2 years on a postdoctoral study of volcanic deposits and processes in the western USA, based at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. John subsequently pursued a successful career in the local and international minerals exploration and mining industry, primarily in the diamond sector, initially with De Beers, and then his own business and in junior mining ventures. He now resides in Hermanus with his wife Madeline, where he and his colleagues of the Overberg Geoscientist Group are spending time highlighting the remarkable geology and related features, including climate change, of the Overberg region and in the Western Cape. John, thank you very much for the presentation, and we're really looking forward to your insights into this remarkable country in the central part of Africa.
Thanks very much, Gert, and thanks everyone for listening to me from a distance. And I look forward to talking to you about Rwanda, a fascinating country up in the middle of Central Africa. Gert has mentioned that I have a geological background. I've been very privileged and, courtesy of diamond exploration and mining, worked all over the world. But this morning I'm going to talk to you about, non-diamond matters and other related points of this fascinating country called Rwanda. Just the background of why I'm talking. In 2018, I was approached to be part of a UK aid-sponsored project program with a group of experts from the UK and Europe, environmentalists, mining people, social development people, to do a project to review the Rwanda Mining Board. The Rwanda RMB, or Rwanda Mining Board, is effectively the Ministry of Mines in Rwanda. I took part in that. I had 2 extended visits to Rwanda, which were most enjoyable. I traveled the length and the breadth of the country. It's obviously quite a small country, as you'll see, easy to get around, very good roads and fantastic people. Without further ado, where we're looking at, so Rwanda is the small country. You'll see there it's only 26,000 square kilometers. It's 1/46th of the size of South Africa. South Africa is 1.22 million square kilometers. It has a population of 13.5 million people, and this extreme density, about 513 people per square kilometer. Compare that to South Africa with its wide open spaces of 50. Its GDP is relatively small, and I'm not sure that GDP figure for South Africa is still reliable, given all the problems we've had in this country. So there on the left-hand side is a map. Kigali is the capital of Rwanda. It's a fascinating, very modern, but African city, but a fascinating place in the middle of the country. In the northwest, you'll be aware that the country flanks onto the Democratic Republic of Congo and also Uganda. You have the Volcanoes National Park, where the gorillas are. And if ever you get the opportunity to go and visit Rwanda, take it and go and have a really good time. When I was doing this work, I'm not sure if it's still there today, there was a direct flight run by Rwanda Airways, a very professional outfit from Cape Town you stopped in Harare, and then you went into Kigali, and it was a really pleasant way to travel to the country. The bottom right-hand slide just shows geographically where the country is relative to Tanzania, the DRC, and obviously Uganda. And I guess being so small, part of the problem, Rwanda had its problems in the past. I think it was kind of a forgotten outpost of Africa. It sort of was stuck away in the middle of Africa. It doesn't have great mineral deposits. It has wonderful scenery. It grows tea and does other things, but let's talk about it. And obviously, I'm also going to talk today not just about geology and mining, but the genocide of 1994. Just a quick summary. It's the cleanest country in Africa, and I've been fortunate to travel most of Africa looking for diamonds, and and internationally from, back of Russia to Brazil and India. And it's just fascinating to see what you can do when you have leadership in a country and everyone gets stuck in and builds a country. There are no plastic bags. The demographic is 85% Hutus, and we'll talk about that. And then obviously the Tutsis and Twas, and today all known as Rwandans. That, the country has also tried to break down the sort of divisions that previously existed between the different tribal black groups. Its economy is agriculture. It's a very agrarian society. We'll see that the land is extremely well and regularly used. It has some manufacturing growing more and more. It's becoming an important services center for Central Africa, banking hub, and all that goes with exports, imports. It's right, given where it is, it's in the center of the country, and there's a lot of traffic that passes through it. It's an excellent tourism hub, both from a historical point of view, the scenery, and the wildlife. The Rwandan government has done amazing things to set up and rebuild its wildlife parks. And obviously in the northwest of the country is where you find the gorillas up in the Volcano National Park, and on the side or the sides and flanks of the impressive volcanoes. That has very strong technology development on the go. It does have some mining, and we were there to try and help them formalize the informal or artisanal mining. And we'll talk obviously about that. And then its exports are coffee, tea, hides, and tin. Tin with a bit of tantalum and tungsten, but mostly tin today. Just in terms of history, and I'm not going to go into this in great detail, this is not a mouthful. The country was effectively spun off from a German colony, Rwanda, Urundi, and you know that Burundi is just next door, and made a UN protectorate, and that was 1918. Then it became a Belgian colony effectively. And it was interesting that the Belgians sort of introduced the identity cards, the sort of thing we had here in the apartheid days with, an identity card and showed what color or race you were. So the Belgians ruled for a long time. That it was given independence in 1962. And it was really thereafter, starting in the 70s, that this whole oppression and widespread killing of the Tutsis started. And we'll talk about that. Paul Kagame, very interestingly, was exiled in Uganda from the country, formed the Rwanda Patriotic Front, and we'll come back to that. And then there were efforts, certainly in the 1990s, to try and sort of normalize the country, and there was a lot of pressure from Western aid sponsors to try and get the different sort of factions to get together. Unfortunately, that never really happened, and this President Habyarimana, excuse my pronunciation, and his leadership really ultimately led to the problems that we're going to talk about. He was on a mission flying back into Kigali Airport in April 1994 with the President of Burundi, and that aircraft was shot down. No one's quite sure precisely who shot it down, but that launched the genocide, and we'll talk a little bit to that as we go along. Today, this is what you see if you drive around Rwanda. It's the city itself, up on the top of one of these rolling hills, is extremely modern. It has a really smart banking center. You'll see top right there, that was a road being built, and you'll see Engen, the local South African fuel and energy company. So Engen's there as well. The big mode of transport, and it's very efficient, are the scooters on the bottom right picture, as you see there, and a very efficient way of getting around this big town. But when you get out into the country, this is the classic type of scenery, and hence the name, a land of 1,000 hills. And the terracing that's gone on in these hills and across the country is just fascinating. So on the left-hand side, there's near Ngorongoro, which is in the northwest of Rwanda, getting up towards the volcanoes. And on the right-hand side, you can see again tea plantations in, I think that's down in the southwest. There's, as I said, ubiquitous terracing. So this is looking from the top of one of the hills that we were traveling across. The roads are very good down into a valley, and you'll see these rows and rows of terraces. And those terraces typically produce about three crops a year. Obviously, being near the equator, it has good rainfall and a pretty decent climate. It gets pretty warm there in their summer. And so crops grow quickly, and you can turn over 3 crops a year. And again, what was very noticeable is that there's no waste lying around, and anything that's organic, be it leaves or leftover compost or whatever, goes back into the soil. So that soil has been worked mostly by hand. There is some more modern farming on the go now, but it is it's made to work extremely hard. And there've been a number of sort of really important international groups working with the Rwandans, to look at how you can, fix the environment. There has been environmental damage, as I'll show you, courtesy of the artisanal mining. But again, just to optimize the use of soil and the use of organic material. And the interesting part too is they don't use much of sort of artificial fertilizers. It's obviously expensive in a country like that for these agrarian farmers who are generally poor. So they go to great efforts to, collect cow dung, collect waste, leaves and so on, and plow it back into the soil. Out in the country, again, the first thing that strikes you is how clean and neat things are. That was always noticeable. It didn't matter where you went. And the houses too, very interesting. For example, you'll notice all those houses on the left-hand side, or dwellings, have effectively new tin roofs. And some years back, so I was there in 2018, but I think the program had run from 2015 and it was still underway. Previously, those homesteads would have been covered by palm leaves and sticks and so on. So it was organic material, and given the rainfall and the climate, that tended to degenerate, and you also got sort of bugs and beetles and insects in there. Anyway, the government came along and said, we'll replace your roofing, and they rolled out this program across the country to give people decent roofs for their homes and keep them properly dry. And we went into one of the government sort of compounds, distribution points in the northwest. We were going out to Lake Kivu and saw the process working, and the what's the word? The sort of compliance and the handing over the sheets and the recording of the information to ensure that you got what you were due, but there was no funny business or taking extra sheets which you weren't allowed to. And again, that was something quite noticeable in Rwanda, that government bureaucrats take pride in their work. They are very, very efficient. They do their job. They're generally well trained, and there was certainly no backhand and funny stuff, which unfortunately has almost become a way of life in amongst the bureaucrats in large parts of our country. Okay, let's just go and look at some of the geology. Unlike South Africa and its geological structure, which is mostly an exceptionally old internal part of the country, a craton, surrounded by younger mobile belts. Rwanda is right in the middle of a young mobile belt, what we call, in this case, the Kabaran mobile belt. It's about 1,000 million years old. And that's effectively built up of flat-lying sediments, not unlike our Table Mountain sandstones, which of course are probably about the same age as some of the sandstones there. These are still flat-lying. They haven't been folded and broken and fractured. So they're somewhat different. underlain by granites. Again, not unlike the Cape granites. If you go to Paarl, as you know, in the Cape area or Western Cape, you'll find granite. So the difference there is the sandstones that overlie the granites haven't been disturbed like our Table Mountain sandstones have. Anyway, and then in the granites are what we call mineralized pegmatites or veins. And you can see there's a schematic on the left-hand side. We would call them, as I say, pegmatites. They are the residues of those granites, as the granites which would have been intruded at sort of 600-700 degrees centigrade were intruded. As they cool under the sedimentary cover, you typically get late-stage liquids and water-borne fluids, and that's where you get these interesting minerals that we refer to as pegmatite associations. You get things like beryllium and lithium, and then tantalum, niobium, tin SN. So there's a series of minerals that are formed in these veins, and you'll see very nicely on the right-hand side is a quarry face with a very distinct large pegmatite vein, in this case of amethyst, coarse amethyst crystals. Many of you will know what amethyst is. It's a dark sort of purple mineral, and it makes nice semi-precious stones if it's not too fractured. So in that case there, quite unusual, was a coarse pegmatite vein which had its root down below in a granite that had cooled and crystallized and driven off this hot fluid, which in this case was mostly silica. And so in Rwanda, the one mineral that does sort of occur in semi-economic and some cases economic concentrations is mostly tin or cassiterite. So right in the middle of that picture is a shiny black mineral. That's typically what tin looks like. And tin, more and more these days, has become extremely important because tin solder is now used extensively in manufacturing of computer boards, computers, any electronic item, robotics will have a lot of tin solder in it, where you solder together the small electronic components and chips and so on. And obviously tin has replaced lead. If I think back in my day, and my dad is an electrical engineer on the railways, if you soldered something, you used lead, and obviously, lead is poisonous. So tin has replaced lead, and it's a very important mineral, given the whole world is now driven by, technology. So hence, mining and recovering tin in Rwanda is part of their sort of economic revenue generation process. One of the problems, and that's why the group of people, or the group I was with the UK Aid, were looking at the artisanal mining, and you can see there examples of the mining into these pegmatite veins on a very informal and typically very dangerous basis. So I had a couple of assistants and a driver, and we drove around all these areas of artisanal mining, looking to see what was going on and how you could, in a sense, formalize operations like that, introduce practical health and safety mechanisms or procedures, and also introduce technology, simple technologies to recover these minerals. One of the very positive things of tin, tantalum, tungsten, and these minerals that we increasingly are using in electric vehicles and in all sorts of technology applications is that they are heavy minerals. They have, just like diamonds, they have a high specific gravity. So diamond has an SG, specific gravity, of 3.5, whereas sand grains and most other minerals like feldspar are much lighter, and tin has a much higher SG, getting up to sort of 8 and 9 and 10, along with tantalum and others. So you can use very simple and nowadays very smart recovery technology, jigs and concentration devices to recover these minerals. Effectively, you don't need chemicals. And that, you know, aesthetically, you can see those operations are messy. If you look at the little edit we went into on the right, so with me pictured on the far right-hand side, you know, the safety concerns are big because there's no real, you know, modern steel or proper support of these structures. And very often, as you'll see on the left-hand side there, you can actually see the very steep surface of that mountain sort of spalling off. And you have rock falls, and those rock falls, you know, can close off those tunnels and people get trapped in them. So as I say, part of the work I was doing, or we were doing, was to look at how we could, you know, direct the Rwanda Mining Board and their informal and formal industry to use better health and safety mechanisms and better technology to recover these minerals. Yeah, in this image, you can see the consequences of this artisanal mining. You know, as we said at the start, a country of 1,000 hills. A lot of those hill slopes are very steep. You start mining those hill slopes to follow the pegmatite. You saw in that earlier picture that the pegmatite vein is almost vertical, and you don't want to mine too much of the country rock or wall rock, because then you dilute your ore. So, you know, people chase these pegmatite veins up and down the side of a hill, and the erosion that follows in the high rainfall periods gets pretty drastic. There on the left-hand side, bottom, is a typical artisanal mining patch where people are digging holes and trying to chase the pegmatite minerals, tin typically here. They often then will end up with a bag of concentrate or a bag of rock in Carrington, and they then go to the river, and they then form effectively sluice boxes or sluiceways, where they wash, they use the river water to wash the light material out of the heavy material which contains the tin. Obviously, the good thing about these minerals is they dark and black. The rocks there are typically white and granitic, so you can see the contrast. And if you build a sluice box well, like the right-hand side, you can get it to work quite well, and you get a reasonably efficient separation of tin compared to the gang or the country rock. However, it is not efficient, and most of those sort of very poorly mined and now, you know, rubble in the river still have concentrations of tin in this case, and sometimes also a bit of tantalum. And with modern technology, you should be able to do it much smarter and at very low cost. Basic jigs that we used in the very early days of diamond mining in this country. I'm sure most of you have seen a jig in operation. It's or a pan that we used to, some of you probably panned for gold in the past. You sort of grind up the material into a fairly uniform size. You put it in a drum or on a jig or a sort of sieve in a drum of water, and then you jig that up and down in the water in a very basic way, and you'll see you typically get an eye that forms in the middle of that sieve, and all the light material floats to the side. And if you do that efficiently, you can you can recover heavy minerals like tin and tungsten and diamonds pretty successfully. But nowadays, you know, there's very smart technology to do it. It's mobile. You can run it with the genset, and that's the sort of interventions that we were proposing to the Rwandans as part of our work. Again, you see here, for example, artisanal brick making. This is making bricks, and you can see them on the bottom right side there. You know, there are dozens of bricks there being laid out to dry, and then those bricks are taken and put into a kiln and baked. But it's a labor type or laborious business. It involves a lot of labor, which has a positive in the sense of creating jobs or keeping people in employment. But it's also, again, fairly inefficient. The the manufacture of the bricks, many of them break, obviously, when you move them, if they're not sufficiently dry. And again, when you put them in the kilns and heat them up, your breakage is again relatively high. But anyway, that builds these houses, and you'll see there again, some of those houses have new tin roofs on them. Okay, let's change tack and go and have a quick run through the genocide program, or the genocide history. It was a just remarkable period of about 100 days of either the genocide, or what's also called the 100-day Rwandan Civil War. It happened between 6th of April, that was the day after the shooting down of the then president's aircraft, and it took place over about 100 days, 3 months, to the 15th of July, 1994. And it was what happened. There was a mass slaughter, and that's really what it was. There's no other, decent term for it, of the Tutsi population, some of the Tars and moderate Hutus. The death figures, previously were put at somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million. Increasingly, those figures have been refined as even today, they are still discovering, mass graves and areas where bodies were thrown into crevices and cracks and that between the mountains. And the sort of current accepted number is about 1 million people, or maybe a bit more. And in this case, I've just assumed 800,000 in 100 days. So there were effectively 8,000 people being, brutally murdered, killed, chopped up per day. The perpetrators, as we already said, the Hutu-led government and the militias, and Hutu neighbors. Neighbors killed neighbors, and you even had cases where a person married to, or a Tutsi married to a Hutu would be killed by her husband or wife. And out of this, obviously, the defender, or the group, the Rwanda Patriotic Front, led by Paul Kagame, eventually, put this to a stop, and he's effectively still the president today. Some love him, some hate him, but he's done a remarkable job of, turning around this country. So this is just a little bit of geography. It's quite busy. So as I say, if you want the presentation to brush up your history of Rwanda, you're most welcome. It just shows the country and the different areas. It also shows the different key events. As I said, the first Tutsis were killed on the 6th, or just after the 6th or 7th. And it was an absolute massacre, and mostly, or initially, it took place on roads. Obviously, many of the Tutsis were almost sort of aware of what was coming immediately after the death of the previous president, and tried to escape into surrounding countries, particularly DRC, or Zaire then, and Uganda, and also to the south into Burundi. So all of those roads became a killing field for people who were trying to leave the country. This here also just shows how the subsequent Rwanda Patriotic Front offensive took place. Kagame and most of his militia and people came out of Uganda, and they effectively targeted initially Kigali as the center of the country, and then worked out from there, including to Goma. I think most of us are still aware of the issues going on in eastern DRC, typically in and around Goma. South African troops are still there as peacekeepers, and there's a lot of debate and discussion as to who's driving that process in eastern DRC, but that's for another discussion. So those are just two diagrams which give you something of the geography and how this whole dreadful genocide took place. Okay, these are just some scenes, obviously not my photographs, but roadblocks were notorious places for killings. And you'll see The classic mode of attack there was machetes. Most Rwandans back then had machetes in their home for cleaning the bush or cutting crops or cane and so on. And so those were a readily available means to kill people. Lots of old firearms in the country too, sticks. So, whoever you didn't like, you basically brutalized and killed. On the left-hand side there, and some of the pictures, make no mistake, are pretty gory, and most of this material comes out of the amazing genocide memorial in the middle of Kigali, and certainly something I found very sobering, and everyone should go and see, and we should make sure never gets repeated, and we should be questioning every war that happens in the world. So left-hand side was a church which had been absolutely desecrated. You can see bones and remnants of bodies in there amongst mattresses. Many people or Tutsis tried to go and hide away in churches, and even there, and we'll come to it, sadly there were nuns and clerics involved in the whole genocide process as well. And the picture on the right-hand side are people leaving or trying to leave the country. I mean, everyone took whatever they could immediately latch onto and tried to leave the country, typically to DRC and to Uganda in the north, and then where possible out of the country to the south. Some also went east to Tanzania. Fortunately, if you can call it that, there was a lot of people, particularly the children, who were put on airplanes and moved out of the country, as quickly as possible. In fact, the biggest part of the population of Rwanda today is actually orphans or orphan people, and many of those people ended up in Europe, for example. They were educated there, and a lot of that diaspora is now coming back to Rwanda, investing in businesses there, and also being an important part of reconstructing the country. How was it carried out? Well, it was with remarkable, meticulous organizations. The government had lists of the opponents. Those lists were handed out to militias, who went and killed them along with their families. Neighbors killed neighbors. As I mentioned, husbands killed their Tutsi wives, saying they would be killed if they refused. ID cards, which had been dished out and sort of instituted by the Belgians, were obviously very useful, because that showed, what group you belonged to. And so if you got to a roadblock with a Tutsi ID card, you were, bound to be slaughtered, sadly. This is just a bit more information. The government, interestingly, and I guess that's also a lesson for all of us, and freedom of information and not letting the media get out of hand. The government and the ruling party controlled the media. The media was very much involved in talking down the Tutsis, and the whole use of the media to weed out the cockroaches. You'll see there in the middle of that slide, meaning to kill the Tutsis, was part and parcel of the process. Names of prominent people to be killed were read out on radio, just remarkable. And as I said, unfortunately, priests and nuns were also convicted of killing people, including those who sought shelter in churches. And very interestingly, in March 2017, the Pope apologized for the church's role in the Rwanda genocide. And in the next slide, we'll see, the other complicit groups. The United Nations was remarkable in its absence, in spite of all the information that they were getting about the genocide that had started in mid-1994. Kofi Annan, I think, who many people in the world thought was a relatively high-profile and decent person, was certainly found lacking in the whole genocide event. The USA, again, they knew about it. There was very little interest or activity from the US. Equally, France almost sided and assisted many of the anti-Tutsi violence, and provided arms and military training to the two groups there, and I'm not going to pronounce those names, the Interahamwe and the Imfuzamba Kwambi, who were the sort of primary operatives of the government of the day that drove the genocide. Belgium too also was found wanting, to the point that again in April 2000, the Belgian Prime Minister of the day, apologized for what had happened through the genocide in a country, that had once belonged to the Belgians. So that's something of the genocide. I mean, there's also, I think most people will be aware, there's been this ongoing, collateral damage, particularly in the Eastern Great Lakes. We see it quite regularly in the press that there's been some or other massacre of people in Eastern DRC, typically blamed on Tutsi rebels. I don't profess to know all the history, but from what I can understand a little bit, being in the geological business and mining business, there's also a lot of Eastern DRC is rich in cobalt, coltan. You'll hear the word used, cobalt and tantalum and tin. And so there's a great deal of illegal mining and sort of subversion that goes on there. Among the different groups, those minerals are richer in Eastern DRC. The deposits are more rich, and a lot of that illegal mining activity also, creates all sorts of unhappiness and armed activity around about the mining operations. This is just a few images on the genocide memorial. As I said, it's a very sobering experience to go there. In total, I spent a couple of days there. It's just, it's both fascinating and sobering. It also, interestingly, is a very good display or displays of other African and international genocides. And I'm sure many of you will be aware of the German, empire against the Guerreros and Nama people in 1904 to 1908. Anyway, like our sort of truth and reconciliation program here in South Africa that we had sort of at the change of politics around about 1994, there's also been a similar Rwandan healing process in Rwanda. They call it the Gacha hearings, which gave the communities a chance to face the accused. And it was very interesting to talk to some of the young people, still relatively young, 29 years ago, who'd now sat across the table in some of the villages and talked to effectively their enemies or the people that might have killed their parents or families. And to, also try and, for me to understand the sort of forgiving process and how Rwanda has gone about effectively a healing process. Down on the right-hand side is effectively, it looks like, our old ID cards or dom passes that were handed out to Black people in this country. And that showed which group you belong to. You can see there on the top right, your race was shown there as, Hutu or Tutsi. And in the top right picture, it's in a big park, the Genocide Memorial. You'll see there the mass internment grave. So the bricks are the walkway that you would walk down, and behind those bricks is an elevated sort of plinth area, flat lying, where particularly bodies and bones at the time that couldn't be identified or names put to them have been interned, and it's over a very large area. And along the side, you can just see above my mass internment description are labels which show where possible family groups or where the bones and the deceased bodies had actually come from. Okay, let's move on to more positive things. As I said, it's a very pretty, gorgeous country. So as part of our work program, we also got out to Lake Kivu on the west side of Rwanda, which borders the DRC. This was a motel. It's a great place to travel. It's very much service with a smile. And of course, the thing that always struck me was the cleanliness. Very interestingly, that lake, you'll all know that Central Africa is also volcanically very active. This sits on the edge of the West Rift Valley. There's the East Rift Valley as well. So these deep lakes are associated with effectively modern continental breakup, splitting of East Africa, and with that goes volcanic activity. Anyway, this lake is also sitting on, or the water sits on, a very large deposit of naturally occurring methane gas, CH4, and carbon dioxide. And there's a lot of ongoing work working on that gas to power electrical generation plants. And there's some pretty novel stuff on the go. As I say, one of the concerns has always been that if methane and CO2 are deathly, you don't want that big gas blob or the big gas sitting down below there to suddenly pop up to the surface. And it has happened before in Central Africa. One of the lakes had a big methane leak and caused a lot of animals and some people to be poisoned and killed. So there's been a great deal of care taken about how you drop pipes and pressure valves into that deposit sitting at the bottom of the lake to be able to utilize it for commercial use. These are just general scenes. Obviously, gorillas are very much part of the country. So that's yours truly on the left-hand side with a carving of a gorilla in Kigali. The top right picture is a picture looking from, in fact, the Genocide Museum up into the center, the central part of Kigali city. And down below were the crew, the very decent crew, very well-educated people that were my sort of guides around Rwanda while I was doing the work that I was doing. Just general observations on the country. When you look at it from a distance and look at it from even a South African perspective, it's remarkable to see the progress made there since 1994. The country, for example, every 5 years publishes and puts together a 5-year plan for economic development. They meet their goals. Again, very noticeable were the people in government, the ministers, the bureaucrats were really, really smart people. A lot of them, as I said, had been trained in Europe, given sort of the Belgium links. I stayed in a hotel, a sort of boutique hotel owned by a Rwandan with his Swiss partners. He'd been orphaned and taken in by a family, a Swiss family, grew up with them, educated by them, and then had come back with Swiss partners to develop a small hotel. So you can see straight away the benefit of education and young people who are really, looking to make a difference. Obviously, the COVID pandemic was very challenging to the country, like all of our countries. When you don't have big industry and a lot of your income is reliant on smaller types of industry, service industry, the small scale mining and growing crops. Fortunately, they could carry on feeding themselves, but it was tough for them as well. I've talked about the diaspora and the people coming back, and that's very noticeable and a very key driver for the ongoing development of the country. It's a young population. It's hardworking. Training and education are a priority, and you can see the benefits of that. And as it stands today, Rwanda aims to become a leading Central Africa services hub. I've mentioned that. It is a modern banking system. It's very easy to open a bank account there. I could walk around and draw money from the auto tellers, just as I can do in this country. Very interestingly, they have no BE requirements. They tried it and they found it didn't work. And their attitude is very enlightening, where they basically say, look, if someone's coming here to set up a business, they automatically will obviously employ local people. And I think most, responsible and decent companies, whether they're foreign or local in this day and age, make an effort to train their employees and uplift their standard of service. So that was, again, I found very encouraging. And when you met a lot of these entrepreneurs developing quarries and even the artisanal miners, they all had a very good grasp of what was going on and how they could mine, and they would go to great lengths to sit with you and share ideas on how they could improve their standard of health and safety, their standard of mining, the recovery of the minerals they were pursuing. It's the second least corrupt country in Africa. There's law and order there. If I think of what we see in Hermanus going on there, and jaywalking, people not stopping at traffic signs, I just find it appalling. And yet here's a little country in the centre of Africa, and it obeys the law. And very interesting there in Rwanda, I got sort of hauled up and stopped by one of the drivers on one of our first trips, and I was planning to sort of quickly jump across a main road at a traffic light which was on orange going red, and he said best not to do that. Anyway, in Rwanda, if you do that or if you break the law, you get thrown in jail, almost no questions asked. And when you're in jail, your family have to come and feed you. So, it's a sort of double punishment. And that to me, again, was interesting to see that, that country, which has come from almost zero base in 1994, has inculcated a very organized, very decent, law-abiding country. And it's safe. I traveled cross country. I stayed in the B&B owned by the Swiss guy in the middle of Kigali, down on the ground floor, slept with the doors and windows open. Never had a problem. And again, out in the rural areas, we typically stay in sort of very simple type B&Bs. The cooking was good, the food was good, and you never worried about trying to find a place to lock up your laptop or put away your cell phone or whatever the case may be. And you could go and have a drink in the pub and come back into your room and find everything was there just as you left it. And one of the fascinating things too is to see these young people, tech-savvy people driving the development of their country. And then just to end, that's just a list of references for those that are interested. And also there's a very recent YouTube video clip out. Go and have a look at it. It's a 20-minute YouTube of what they call Zipline. It's a company very active in Rwanda, all run by bright young people, and they're using drones to get medical supplies out into rural areas. And man, they're doing a smart job. And we need to see more of that in South Africa. Obviously, some of it's there, but we need better education, and we need to use our young, smart, and creative people. List of references, and for those of you who want some real, reading of colonialization and some of the negatives of it, obviously there've been positives as well. But if you haven't read it, go and read King Leopold's Ghost and what King Leopold did to the Zairean people or the DRC, rape and plunder of their amazing resources. At that time, it was mostly about rubber between 1885 and 1908. And if you want to know why the DRC still is such a poor broken country, there's an example of what colonialization did to this incredibly wealthy country, which has never really got off its feet and going again. So that's my bundle. Thanks very much for listening, and happily answer questions. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kat.
Excellent, John. Thank you very much. I think there are many questions. Yes, go ahead.
Morning, John.
Hello, Tisha.
Thank you. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. I have a question. As you say, it's a small country. I want to know what you think the chances of success are for the British government's proposal to send their refugees to Rwanda. Apart from the fact that I found it morally outrageous that a developed country can say, we don't want them, we'll go and dump them in another country. How do you think, obviously they're going to pay Rwanda quite a lot of money to do this. Do you think that the country will be able to absorb these refugees? Suella Braverman, the British Home Secretary, was there yesterday trying to tie the deal up. What do you think the chances of the success of such a project would be?
Well, Letitia, I agree with you. I think it's disgusting. I mean, it's a crazy world we live in today, but that's not the subject of the presentation. I mean, I think that whole process, from what I gather, is running into some pretty stiff pushback. I haven't followed it like you probably have recently. And I think I still have, a number of good friends there and talk to them in Rwanda quite regularly on WhatsApp and that. And they too, some of them have raised it and say, hey, we don't like that, and we hope it doesn't happen. So, so time will tell. When it comes to Kagame, I mean, he's a very interesting character. I got to sort of meet and know a person who was quite close to him, and he's obviously got a very tough streak. He had to deal with the genocide as he did, but he also apparently has a very sort of mellow, and if you can call it that, caring side of him as well, which is aimed at uplifting the country. So look, I don't have a simple answer. I mean, personally, as I say, I hope it doesn't happen. I do get the sense that there's been pushback, but and I'd be disappointed if it did take place. So sorry, not the answer you might have expected, but that's my view.
Thank you, she says. Any other questions?
Good morning, John. I'm intrigued about communication within the country to the general population. I'm thinking of a trip between Hermanus and Cape Town, and you see all these TV dishes, and I always feel so much bad comes through television. Does the population there all get television? Are they what are they watching? Can you tell us something about communication?
The communication is excellent because, with the topography, well, a small country, topography that involves some pretty high mountains. So you put a mast or two on top of a mountain, in Rwanda, and you can, talk across the country. So I used a laptop wherever I went and my cell phone, and all of the, the ordinary people are connected as well. The interesting thing there, of course, when you look at the communities, those people and I didn't, I showed that little boy with his mother in the background, little kid on a farm. Probably the big difference there is when people get up in the morning, they go to work to put food on the table at night and feed their kids and families. There's almost not enough time to be getting up to skullduggery or spending time watching a TV. Some of the the better or the sort of more upmarket people, certainly in the towns, had TVs, and the coverage was pretty universal. and we had obviously TVs in the room, but communication is very good. People, even the women or the men working out in the fields will typically have a cell phone. But as I say, when you're poor, and it's a developing country still, and you rely on agriculture largely to feed the people, and some of that product also gets exported. You don't have a lot of time to then go and look at a TV in the evening. In fact, what I found fun in the evenings after we'd come back, to where we were staying after a day in the field or a day going to visit sites, the sort of center part of the little villages typically has a market, and there's a lot of barter that goes on in that market. So if you're growing, pumpkins or maize, there very often wasn't much money exchanging hands, but people were, bartering and swapping produce, as part of feeding the family. It was a much kinder, more cohesive, probably is the word I'm looking for, population that I experienced. They're also very proud of what they've achieved in that period. So if you stopped, at a school or in a village, and they realized you were white, and then you were a bit different because you had a vehicle and people that were escorting you, so to speak, people would come out and talk to you about where you came from and what were you doing and why. And you'd get some of the school kids also come and have a chat. So there's a very strong sense of community in a country like that, because you've come from pretty horrific background, and you're now trying to fix it, and you've all sort of got to roll up your sleeves to make it work. It's very interesting there too. You probably heard about it. On the last Saturday of every month, you may not travel to town or go out of your village. The community gets together, and the president's done it. I saw it in Kigali. There's a school that needs painting or it needs some repairs, or there's a road that's overgrown. So the whole community, gets together and they go and fix it. And, they do it without questioning it, and there's no one, slouching on the side. As I say, if you slouch or you break the law, you're going to end up in jail. So all round, I'm not saying it's perfect. It's got lots of challenges, obviously. It doesn't have a big, industrial base or mining like South Africa used to have. But there's a very strong sense of community and wanting the place to work. And young people are all, they've got to go to school and they're getting educated. I mean, even in some of the fairly rural areas that we drove to, there was a college, teaching basic agriculture. That one of our suggestions we made is that they should have, effectively a mining technical college, which teaches applied health and safety methods, it teaches applied recovery methods, sets up a processing plant to recover tin, and to also form co-ops. Our ideas were well received, and you got the sense, and I'm looking forward to going back there sometime soon, to see what is actually sort of followed. But the sense of community and support for one another and barter to, exchange food product, I think is also a very important part of their society.
John, maybe just some of the historical background. As I understand it, during the colonial period, the Belgians really supported the Tutsis, and they became the elite ruling group in Rwanda, despite the fact they were the minority.
So correct. I didn't get that across. Yeah, correct. Yeah.
The genocide is really revenge killing on the part of the majority of the population as revenge against the so-called ruling Tutsis of the earlier period. But that is partly due to the way that the Belgians used the Tutsis for their own purposes to rule the country.
Yeah, you're quite correct, Gert. They had basically taken the Tutsis, made them a class above the rest, had ID books. In the Belgium days were very privileged. They got, first take of everything. And obviously, that created a groundswell of revenge, which, was pretty drastic when it eventually happened. But you spot on. And as I say, you know, some of those books I've listed in the references, one or two of them are quite short and very readable and well written. You know, if people are interested, it's fascinating to go, you know, page through or read a couple of them.
John, thank you very much. Thank you for this comprehensive overview. Thank you for breaking your time to speak to us and for the preparation. It was really fascinating.
Thanks for your great effort again. Cheers, everyone. Have a good day.